Rain had a way of softening even the hardest things in New York City concrete. Noise, pride. It fell in sheets that morning, soaking the sidewalks and filling potholes with muddy reflections of people too busy or too heartbroken to notice. Somewhere between the chaos of traffic horns and rushed footsteps, a woman named Alina paused in the downpour. She didn't have an umbrella. Her sneakers were soaked through, but she didn't care, because someone was crying. She had just stepped out of the corner grocery store, a bag of diapers in one hand and a half-eaten bagel in the other, when she heard it. A child's sob, faint but raw. Alina stopped walking. She turned her head slowly, eyes scanning the street. That sound wasn't the kind of cry kids make when they don't get a toy or when they trip on a shoelace. No, this was deeper. It was the sound of loneliness. A few feet away, under the awning of an abandoned storefront, sat a boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old. Drenched, his knees were pulled up to his chest, and his small hands trembled as he wiped his face, trying to hide the tears. His school uniform, though expensive-looking, was clinging to his thin frame, soaked to the seams. His backpack sat beside him, open books half falling out. He looked completely alone. Elena's heart tightened. She was late getting home. Her 2-year-old daughter was with a neighbor, and dinner still needed to be cooked. But she couldn't walk past this boy. She couldn't ignore those tears. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently, crouching down a few steps away. "You're okay?" The boy looked up, startled. His eyes were a piercing shade of blue, the kind that usually belonged in paintings. But right now, they were red-rimmed, swimming with sadness. I got lost," he stammered. "I told the driver to stop, and he just drove away." Alina blinked, surprised. A driver? This kid wasn't like the ones she saw on her block. His shoes were name-brand, the kind she saw in fancy magazines. His watch looked real, not a toy, and yet here he was, crying and alone. "What's your name, baby?" she asked, inching closer. "Lucas," he whispered. "Lucas Bennett." Alina offered him a soft smile. "Hi Lucas, I'm Alina." She reached into her paper grocery bag and pulled out a small pack of tissues. "Here, let's clean that face up, huh?" Lucas hesitated, then took the tissues. With trembling fingers, as he wiped his face, Alina sat beside him, ignoring the rain that continued to splash against her already wet clothes. She pulled off her own thin jacket, barely dry from the laundromat. Triphand gently draped it over his shoulders. "You don't need to do that," he murmured. "I know," she replied. "But sometimes it helps, when someone does." "What?" She didn't see what she couldn't have seen was the black SUV parked across the street. The tinted windows hid a man watching every move. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel. His jaw clenched tight, his heart pounding louder than the rain on the roof of the car. That man was Grant Bennett. Tech mogul, billionaire, one of the most powerful and private men in the country. And the crying boy on the sidewalk, his only son. Grant hadn't meant to lose him. Lucas had been acting out for weeks, angry, distant, always running. But this time was different. The moment he got the call from Lucas's school that the driver had returned alone, Grant's world shifted. He scoured GPS signals and surveillance. It took an hour to find the boy, and now, here he was. Not just safe, but being comforted by a woman who clearly had nothing, no riches, no help, just kindness. Alina didn't know who she was holding. She didn't know her simple gesture of wearing a jacket, a tissue. A bit of warmth was unfolding in front of a man whose world ran on numbers and screens, a man whose billions couldn't buy what she'd just given his son. "I don't like it there," Lucas said suddenly, breaking the silence. "It's a big house, but it's so empty. There are people everywhere, but none of them look at me. Not really." Alina didn't speak right away. Instead, she pulled out a plastic-wrapped sandwich from her grocery bag. "Turkey and cheese," she offered. "My daughter won't touch it unless it's peanut butter, so it's yours if you want." Lucas took it. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Alina watched him for a moment, then spoke softly. "You know, sometimes the biggest houses are the loneliest." But it doesn't have to stay that way. He looked up, curious. You just have to find your people, she said, with a quiet smile. The ones who see you, really see you. Across the street, Grant swallowed hard. Her words hit deeper than they should have. Maybe because he knew. She was right. Maybe because he realized he hadn't really seen his own son in a long time. The rain began to lighten. The sky still wore a heavy gray, but patches of light peeked through, hinting that the worst of the storm was over. Alina stood slowly, brushing off her jeans. Come on, she said, reaching out a hand. Let's get you somewhere warm. Maybe find your dad, yeah. Lucas hesitated, then placed his small hand in hers. Grant's fingers hovered over the door handle. Every instinct told him to rush out, to scoop up his son, to thank the woman who had unknowingly done more in 10 minutes than his entire staff had in 10 months. But he didn't move, because something about this felt important. Lucas didn't need a car to swoop in. He needed this moment. He needed to be seen, held, helped by someone who didn't know his name, his family, or his fortune. Grant stayed in the car. Heart-pounding. Alina led Lucas across the street, her steps slow, steady. As they approached the corner, she stopped and looked both ways. Lucas stood close to her side, holding the sandwich in one hand, and her jacket tightly around his shoulders. You hungry? She asked. There's a bakery around the corner. Nothing fancy, but they've got warm bread and good tea. Lucas nodded, eyes brighter now. And then, finally, Grant stepped out of the car. He stood in the middle of the sidewalk, rain soaking his coat. He said nothing, just watched as Alina guided his son through the crosswalk, completely unaware that the man watching her was one of the richest in America. When she looked up and saw him, this tall man with stormy eyes and tension in every line of his body, Lena slowed. Lucas didn't notice. He was focused on the bakery ahead, but Alina did. Something in her gut told her this wasn't just another stranger on the street. This man, he was connected to the boy. Their eyes met, steps faltered. She gently rested a hand on Lucas's shoulder. Lucas, the man said quietly, stepping forward. It's me. The boy turned, his eyes went wide. Dad. Elena's heart skipped. She looked from Lucas to the man and back again. I'm sorry, Grant said, voice tight with emotion. I didn't know where you went. I was worried. Lucas's bottom lip trembled, but he didn't run. He didn't speak. He just looked down at the sandwich in his hand, then back at Alina. She helped me, he whispered. She didn't even ask who I was. She just helped. Alina felt her cheeks flush. She shifted awkwardly, unsure what to do. She took a step back. I didn't know he was. You didn't have to, Grant said, cutting her off gently. His voice softened. Thank you, truly. Alina nodded. She tried to smile, but something about this felt too big, too strange. I should go, she murmured, looking down at her grocery bag. My daughter's waiting. Please, Grant said suddenly, surprising even himself. Wait, Alina stopped, unsure why her feet listened. Grant looked at her, really looked. Her tired eyes, her soaked sneakers, her simple clothes, and yet there was a warmth around her, a gentleness. She had done what no amount of money could have. Can I give you a ride? He asked quietly. Alina blinked. No, thank you. The bus is fine, I insist. She hesitated. I don't want anything from you. Grant smiled faintly. I believe you. They stood there in the rain, three people from three different worlds, brought together by something as simple and as rare as kindness. Lucas tugged at his dad's sleeve. Can we take her to the bakery first, please? Alina laughed softly. Caught off guard, Grant looked down at his son, then back at the woman who had given him shelter in a storm. All right, he said. The bakery first. None of them knew it yet. But that small decision to share a cup of tea and warm bread would change their lives forever. But just as they stepped into the bakery, a black sedan pulled up across the street. Inside it sat a woman with sharp eyes and a cold expression. She lowered her sunglasses slowly, watching them through the window. Then she picked up her phone. I found them, she said. And you're not going to believe who he's with. The storm outside had passed. But another one was just beginning. The bakery smelled like warm cinnamon and fresh dough. The kind of place where time slowed down and everything outside the rain, the honking horns, the tension felt far away. Alina sat in the corner booth with Lucas beside her, still wearing her jacket. Across from them, Grant stirred his tea, but hadn't taken a sip. He was watching them quietly, like he was trying to memorize something. Maybe it was the way Lucas was finally smiling, or the way Alina broke pieces of her bread roll and passed them to the boy like a mother would. Instinctively, without thinking, Lucas leaned against her shoulder like he had done it 100 times before, even though they'd only met an hour ago. That, more than anything, made something shift inside Grant. He had spent years building empires and securing contracts, but none of it taught him how to reach his son. This woman had done more in one afternoon than he had managed in years, and she didn't even know his last name when she did it. I owe you, Grant said softly, finally breaking the silence. Alina looked up, surprised. No, you don't. It's what anyone would have done. That's the thing, he said, meeting her eyes. Not everyone would have, she shrugged. Maybe, but I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm just trying to be a decent human being. Grant nodded slowly, his gaze steady. Sometimes, that's the rarest thing. She didn't respond. Something about the way he said it made her uneasy. Not because it was harsh, because it wasn't, but because there was truth buried in his words. Pain. Lucas was happily munching on a chocolate muffin now, the sandwich, long forgotten. Alina reached over and gently brushed a crumb off his cheek. The tenderness of the moment didn't go unnoticed. Do you two know each other? Asked the barista curiously as she walked by their table. Alina was about to say no, just strangers, passing through a storm, but Grant spoke first. We're getting to know each other, he said. Alina shot him a look but didn't argue. Outside, the woman in the black sedan hadn't moved. Her name was Victoria Hale, publicist, strategist, and for years she'd been Grant Bennett's right hand professionally, and for a short, complicated time, personally. She wasn't just someone from his past. She was someone who had shaped parts of his present, and watching him now, sitting at a small bakery table, with a working-class woman and a muffin-covered child. Something dark tightened in her chest. She'd returned to New York for meetings, so she told herself, but the truth was more complicated. Victoria didn't like losing, and seeing Grant, America's most untouchable tech CEO, smiling across the table at a woman in worn-out shoes. It didn't sit right. Her call was short. He's with a woman, she said. Not pressworthy. Yet, but I'm keeping an eye. That evening, Alina walked out of the bakery with a half-hearted thank you and the same firm refusal for a ride. She held Lucas's hand tightly until they reached the corner where her bus would take her home. Grant stood beside them, unsure of what to say. You're welcome to come visit him, she said after a long pause. If you're okay with that. Grant blinked. Visit? I babysit a couple of neighborhood kids. If Lucas wants to come by after school, get away from whatever fancy place he calls home, that's fine. He studied her, and you'd let him. She nodded. Only if he wants to. Grant glanced at his son, who gave a hopeful little nod. Then, yeah, I'd like that. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Lucas began spending afternoons at Elena's small apartment, helping feed her toddler daughter, Marisol, playing board games, laughing more than anyone could remember. He fit in so naturally, it was like he'd always belonged there. Alina didn't treat him like he was delicate or rich. She treated him like a kid, like someone worth listening to. Meanwhile, Grant found himself pulling away from boardrooms and investment calls to drop by once in a while. At first, it was to check on Lucas. Then it was to see Alina. He started bringing groceries she didn't ask for, toys Marisol didn't need. Then books, flowers, and one day-warm rice pudding, because she mentioned once that it reminded her of her mother. She didn't push him away, but she didn't make it easy either. Alina had spent most of her adult life doing things alone. Raising Marisol after her ex walked out. Working 2 jobs, selling clothes online just to afford rent. Kindness from strangers always made her cautious. And kindness from billionaires? That felt dangerous. Still, something about Grant softened each time he entered her world. He didn't wear suits around her anymore. He brought food, helped clean up after dinner, read bedtime stories. One night, as he helped tuck Marisol in, he looked at Alina and said, almost shyly, "I forgot how peaceful a real home feels." She didn't respond, but her silence wasn't cold, was careful. But just as things felt like they might start becoming something more, everything unraveled. One Thursday afternoon, Alina was walking home from the market, Marisol on her hip, when a woman stopped her on the street, tall, confident, and immaculately dressed in heels that didn't belong anywhere near a cracked city sidewalk. "You're Alina, right?" the woman said with a glossy smile. "Yes," Alina said slowly. "I'm Victoria Grant's longtime associate." Alina's stomach twisted. "I thought we should chat," Victoria continued. Woman to woman, Alina held Marisol tighter. "About what?" "About Grant, and Lucas, and you." Her smile never faltered. "See, I'm the one who handles Grant's image. And while I'm sure this whole underdog meets billionaire story makes for a sweet fairy tale, it's complicated." Alina frowned. "Are you threatening me?" Victoria tilted her head. "No, darling, I'm informing you. Grant has responsibilities, press, investors, reputation. The last thing he needs is a scandal. A single mum with no background check, no degree, no structure. I'm not trying to be anything to him," Alina said, her voice tight. Victoria stepped closer. "But you already are. And it's not just about you. It's about Lucas. If word gets out that his father let a stranger take over his care one, without so much as a college education, do you know what kind of headlines that makes?" Elena's throat dried. "I love those kids." "Then do what's best for them," Victoria said, eyes cold. "Step back. Let the professionals handle it. This little dream world you've created, it's lovely, but it's not real." That night Alina didn't eat dinner. She watched Marisol sleep, her tiny hand wrapped around a plush bunny. She thought about Lucas, about how his laughter had come back, and she thought about Grant, how he looked at her like she was the only honest thing in a world made of deals. But what if Victoria was right? What if she was just temporary? A detour in a life already paved with power. The next morning, Alina left a note for Grant. It was short. "I think it's time Lucas stayed home more. He's doing better now. Thank you for everything." She didn't sign it with love or hope, just her name. She turned off her phone and went to work. When Grant showed up at her apartment later that day, Lucas in tow, Alina didn't answer the door. He knocked twice, waited, called her name. Nothing inside the apartment. Alina sat silently behind the door, Marisol asleep in her lap, tears falling on her daughter's blanket. Outside, Lucas turned to his father, confused. "Why won't..." She opened the door. Grant didn't have an answer, because he didn't know. But he had a feeling. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a name surfaced: Victoria. He would find out what happened, and he would fix it. He had to, because he was starting to realize something money had never taught him. Some things are too rare to lose, some people too real to let go. And some storms, no matter how late they arrive, are still worth running through. But what Grant didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Victoria wasn't finished, and the next move she made would push all of them to the edge. The rain had returned to New York, softer this time, but steady, like a quiet warning. Grant stood outside Elena's apartment again, this time alone. He stared at her door, the same one that once opened with warmth and laughter. Now, it stayed closed, locked not just by wood and hinges, but by fear. And he had a feeling he knew who had planted that fear. He called Charlotte, his assistant, and asked one question. "Did Victoria speak to Alina?" Charlotte paused. "Yes, she didn't." "Tell you no," he said flatly. "She didn't." Within the hour, Grant was in Victoria's office, and the air between them was cold. "You told her to step back," he said. voice low. Victoria didn't flinch. I advised her to consider your reputation. That's my job. You crossed a line, Grant snapped. You humiliated a woman who gave my son more peace than I ever could. She's a distraction, Grant, Victoria said calmly. A risk. You're a public figure. What happens if this becomes a headline? I don't care, he said, cutting her off. Not anymore. Victoria raised a brow. So what are you going to do? Leave your world behind? I don't need to, Grant replied. I just need to make sure my world includes people who actually matter. He walked out without another word. Later that day, Lucas sat by the window in his father's penthouse, clutching a paper drawing. It was of Alina, Marisol, and himself, holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. He had drawn it the day before. She stopped answering her door. Can we go see her? He asked quietly. Grant knelt beside him. We can try. They returned to the same small apartment, where laughter used to echo and the smell of rice and cinnamon always floated through the air. Grant knocked. This time with nothing in his hands. No gifts, no fancy groceries, no promises. Just hope. The door opened slowly. Alina stood there, tired eyes rimmed red. I'm sorry, she whispered, before he could say anything. Grant shook his head. Don't be. I should have protected you. From everything. I didn't want to get in the way, she said. I'm just me. You being you is exactly what made all this mean something, he said softly. Lucas needs you, and so do I. Lucas peeked out from behind his father's coat. The moment Alina saw him, her heart cracked wide open. He stepped forward and hugged her tight, burying his face in her side. I missed you, he whispered. She kissed the top of his head. I missed you more. Grant cleared his throat gently. Can we come in? Alina hesitated, then opened the door wider. That night, the three of them sat around the small table eating leftover empanadas. Marisol giggled with a juice box in hand. Lucas taught her how to fold napkins into little boats. Grant sat quietly, soaking it all in. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't polished or perfect, but it felt like home. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift. Grant made a public appearance with Alina and the kids at a community fundraiser. A few photos were taken, a couple of articles written, but the world didn't crumble. In fact, it praised him. Tech giant with a heart was the headline. But for him, none of that mattered. What mattered was that Lucas laughed more, that Alina smiled again, that Marisol reached for his hand like she trusted him. Victoria resigned quietly after that. No scenes, no statements. She simply faded from Grant's professional world, realizing too late that control doesn't win hearts. Kindness does. One spring morning, Grant stood on Elena's tiny kitchen step with a ring box in his pocket. But before he could say anything, she stopped him. I don't want anything big, she said. Reading him easily. I know, he replied. I just want to belong. Wherever you are. She smiled. Then you already do. The wedding was small. Just friends, a few neighbors, and two very happy children. Lucas gave a short speech that made everyone cry. Alina found me when I was lost, he said, voice steady, and my dad. He found himself again because of her. That's what real love looks like. Not big houses or money. Just showing up. And that's what they kept doing. Showing up for each other. Through laughter, fights, burnt dinners, bedtime stories, long walks, and quiet nights. They didn't build a perfect life. They built a real one. Years later, Alina would open a small bakery of her own, a cozy place on a Brooklyn corner, where the smell of warm cinnamon drifted through every morning. Grant helped fund it, but she ran it with her own two hands. She named it Second Chance. Because sometimes, that's all it takes. One chance. One moment of kindness. A crying boy. A mother who stopped in the rain. And a man who watched it all. Never knowing it would be the day his entire world began to change. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and comment. Where you're watching from, Because stories like this remind us love doesn't always knock, sometimes it cries on a sidewalk. And all it takes is someone humble enough to hear it.